All right, good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today for our session on EVAAS, the nuts and bolts of EVAAS. My name is Julie Malik. I'm the Senior Director here of School of Accountability at the Data Research and Accountability Department at Wake County. Thank you all again for taking time out to meet with us today. We essentially have three objectives we're going to review today. One is just to review and establish a general re-understanding of a value-added growth model, which is what EVAAS is. It's been a while since we explored EVAAS due to the pandemic, so now's a great time to just revamp and re-understand what that means. We're going to investigate some key information to consider when reviewing 2021 EVAAS, and then we're going to become familiar with resources for reports and roster verification. So those are our primary objectives for the day. So let's just do a quick check-in. In the chat box, if you would please enter the one word other than growth, because that's the gimme, that springs to mind when you hear the word EVAAS. So what word comes to mind? If you'll just type that in the chat. Effectiveness, that's a good one. Yeah. Lots of math. There are lots of math that goes into it. Some confusion. Hopefully some of that will be resolved today. Lots and lots of information, lots of good information. EOG and EOC testing. Excellent. Any other words before we move on? Okay, those are great words. Hopefully, like I said, some of those words will be addressed today, and if not, perhaps you'll have some resources to move forward. All right, so again, let's just do a general reflection on what a value-added growth model involves, which is what EVAAS is. It's very dependent on adequate student testing history for a student. A student cannot be part of a growth model, value-added growth model, unless they have adequate testing history. And particularly for elementary schools this year, you can consider there was some gaps in testing history. So we have to keep that in mind. EVAAS creates groups of students with similar testing history. So the adequate testing history is important at the student level, but then before testing happens, EVAAS evaluates that testing history and groups students with similar testing histories. Those students are compared against each other. So if we think about like an AIG group of students, those students are being compared to like students across the state. So all those students who are high achieving are compared to the growth of other students who are high achieving. So that makes it easier to see growth amongst all achievement levels. Then after tests are given, they evaluate how the students did as a group. So it's really important. This is not a did you meet a projection model. This is we look at your testing history, we put you in groups, and then after testing takes place, you determine how students did against one another on those assessments to see if students made more growth, less growth than their peers of similar testing history. So that is the idea behind a value-added growth model. So that is again why low performing, high performing, they're grouped in groups of each other. So all students are expected to grow, and then they evaluate backwards. So there's another example that I like to use. Let's say we all get a nice little plant, right? And same little soil, same little pot. And we all get a pot and a plant. And we take them home. Well, first they're kind of lined up before we take them home. And we say, oh, you can see the lineup. We can put them in order according to, say, height or width of the stem or depth of the roots or whatever we're trying to measure. So we line them up, and then we all take a little plant home. Now, those plants are going to grow over the designated time frame, unless they come to my house, in which case, sorry, plant, I really do a good job of doing one thing with plants, and they're not to grow them. But that's how we all take our little plant home. We all have a different experience with that plant. Some of you might repot it in a different pot with different soil, add fertilizer. There's different amounts of water they're going to get, different amounts of sun. So at the conclusion of this time, we take all the little plants and we bring them back and we line them up again. So after a certain amount of time that we allow the plants to grow and thrive, we bring them back, we line them up, and then we compare to see if one plant may have grown a lot more than another plant or than a couple plants. So we're all growing forward, but some saw a greater growth depending on what was done to that plant, and some may have not seen a lot of growth, like if it were at my house. So that's the whole example and analogy of a value-added growth. Now let's think about what has happened here in North Carolina and honestly across the state when it comes to assessment in this time frame that I was just talking about with the plants. In 1819, we had a typical year. At the conclusion of 1819, we had a growth measure. And growth measures kind of start over every year. We'll talk about that more in a minute. So after 1819, we had a growth measure. 1920 was quite honestly a somewhat typical year until March. There was lots of opportunity for growth, lots of things happening. Students were given great educational experiences. And then there were no assessments given at the conclusion of the 1920 school year. So no growth was measured between end of 1819 and 1920. However, quite a bit of growth took place. And then 2020, 2021 happened, an extremely atypical year. Lots of different things were going around the state because this is a statewide model. So it's not just about what happened here at Wake County. It's a statewide model, and you have to consider what happened across the state because those little groups of children are being compared to other groups of children across the state, not just Wake County. It was an extremely atypical year. Assessments are given, but with lower than usual participation rates. So think about if you didn't participate in assessments after 2020, 2021, the student is not included in the growth measure. They don't have a test. But growth is calculated, but the last time it was calculated is the end of 1819. So there is this 2-year span of growth opportunities. And typically those growth opportunities are very similar across the state. But I think we will all agree that is not what happened in 2020, 2021. Very different experiences took place. So it's not just this 1 year, we started brand new start at the beginning of the year because we just had a growth measure and we measure at the end of the year as another growth measure. We had this 2-year span. Now, as I mentioned a minute ago, Wake County did things maybe slightly different than say they had in Hyde County or Buncombe County or Ashe County. Our experiences look very different in 2020, 2021. Those experiences may have impacted our ability to provide educational experiences to students in a way that may have been different in, like I said, Dare County, Terrell County, Transylvania County, Polk County. There's all kinds of things that happen. So considering this is a statewide measure, just put in the chat or unmute yourself. What kind of operational characteristics were different in 2020, 2021, aside from instruction, but what kind of operational characteristics here in Wake County that may influence how we fared versus the rest of the state as far as educational experiences and adding to educational growth? The ability to have virtual academy, Cheryl, good. That's true. What else may have been different? Great. We were able to distribute laptops pretty quickly, and we do have very strong resources in Wake County. Teacher shortage, that could have been heavier, lighter in different counties. I'm not sure how other counties fared with the sub shortage, but that is absolutely an influence. We do have a lot of resources here in Wake County that some of the, say, like a Bertie County didn't have. So that may have influenced some things. We were very fortunate here in Wake County. Okay, great answers. How about the ability in some homes of having a highly a parent who is maybe more equipped to help students on their work? That varies even within Wake County, but that was a factor. Another thought might be some counties were able to be in person the whole year. Different pods of Wake County, right, Cheryl? Okay, great thoughts. Thank you so much for bringing those to our attention. So as you can see, 2020, 2021 was a very different year for lots of reasons. And since this is a statewide measure, we have to keep in mind that it is a statewide measure, not just a Wake County measure. Continuing understanding EVAAS growth, EVAAS likes to talk about 4 keys of understanding EVAAS growth. The first one is that growth is not the same as proficiency. We know that, but it's really hard when we start talking about test data to really internalize that. What I like to say is growth is truly at beginning of the year, end of the year. What is the growth experience in this set timeline? Proficiency is, do we meet certain criteria, certain competencies, right? So in this year of 21-22, we feel like that we are trying so hard to catch up with proficiency due to the last couple of years, right? This is a constant pressure on our shoulders is reach proficiency. But what's great about growth is it's a new start every year. We take the similar testing histories, we line them up like those little plants. We teach our hearts out and we do everything we can for those kids. At the end of the year, we reflect to see how they perform versus all the other kids in the state with similar testing histories. The other thing is it's all relative. It's all dependent on the results of those tests. Another way to look at it, think about the current housing market, okay? We all have some thoughts on that. Raise your hand if you were so tempted in the last year to just sell your house because you know that it went up in value and you were shocked how much. So you just have this itch to sell your home. Oh, there you go. We have somebody who did. Right? But the issue is I'm gonna have to buy another one, or I'm ready to downsize. This is a great time. We have a couple house sellers. That's fantastic. Let's think about this in terms of growth. So Ann Alick's, I always say it wrong, Ann Alick's home value, let's say she started in 2015 and that was the value of her home. In 2020, it went up like $45,000. So she's like, let's press that button. Let's sell this house. But then she's thinking, okay, is that really good compared to all the other comparable homes? So we have to think about how comps, and if you've sold your house, you know all about comps. So does this match the growth that other comps met? So let's look at Ann's home. If these are her median or median home prices in 2015 to her comparable testing history, comparable homes, it looks like they went up in value about $80,000. So now Ann's like, well, mine grew, but it didn't really grow as much as my comps. Maybe I should stay put rather than going out and trying to find another home. I hope you all had great success in that, and I'm sure you did because I'm sure you did your research. But this is an example where Ann's home grew, but all the other homes grew more. So she had positive growth, but if we consider an EVAAS index, she would probably have a negative index. So we have to consider it's all relative. It may seem like I'm making great growth, but until you make that comparison with other students across the state with similar testing histories, it's hard to say. So the third key is the additional factors and influences from 2020, 2021. You all just talked about a lot of those, right? Whether we were virtual, in person, the resources. We had buses going out to communities with packets, paper packets every week and trading those with students. I think that may or may not have been as good of an educational experience as we were able to provide at Wake. But there are additional factors and influences. You know, these students had the social emotional strain on these students. There's lots of things that impacted growth for the last couple years. And as I mentioned, it has been 2 years since the last growth measures were calculated. I'm going to show yet another example of how you can think about this. And this is in regards to educator effectiveness, which you all brought forward at the beginning question. So let's think about these time frames again. 1819, like I said earlier, we had a growth measure. So we're starting fresh and anew at the beginning of 2019. So let's say I'm teacher A and I'm teaching my heart out to these kids that are in my classroom in 1920 until March, about 80% of the school year, which is a lot. So I'm teaching. Those students are obtaining educational growth because of my teaching. The world changed in March. We did not assess. So there was no growth metric. So there was no opportunity to hit that, okay, reset button. We're going to start growth over, because that growth is still started over from 1819. Since there was no growth metric, we're continuing because we didn't measure growth. We're still just piling on the growth. We're just growing and growing and growing into 2020, 2021. But in this case, my kids have been scattered to the wind, right? Like we do. Like if I were a 6th grade teacher, they've scattered to 7th grade in multiple teacher classrooms. Think of this also if you're a middle school person. Think if teacher A were in 5th grade, teacher B, C, D are in 6th grade. So not only did they potentially move to different class teachers, they also potentially moved to different schools. So teacher B, C, D working just as hard as they can, doing all they know to do in 2020, 2021, and those students are making academic growth. They are, because good teaching is happening. So at the end of 2021, we have this growth measure. That growth score is being attributed to teacher B. However, the last time growth metric was calculated was before teachers A time with those students. So that growth measure is not, we didn't stop in 1 year, we stopped 2 years, and there were 2 teacher influences on how much that student grew. So we need to be very careful when we look at big transitions like teacher effectiveness after 2020, 2021, and even school effectiveness after 2020, 2021. I have another reflection point, but I'm just going to keep going because we try to keep these to about 20 minutes and a half hour, and I'm already there. So what can we consider? Well, it's really important to go back and look at trends. Look at 2018, 2019, and 2021. This is a way to triangulate data, which we talk about a lot in Wake County. So we can triangulate those 3 years, those 2 somewhat typical years, to this year. If the trends look similar, then great. Let's move on. Let's celebrate those successes. Let's remind ourselves what we're doing for the good of the kids. The other thing we consider, there's a student probability for success. That's very actionable. You can get student lists. You can look at those students and see their probability of being successful this year on these tests. So that can be really helpful just to cross-check your groups that you have already established to ensure everyone that might struggle for success is being reached. Now, as I said, we don't have a lot of time today. And you will have access to this PowerPoint, and these are links to some great report resources. These are the 2 primary reports that you'll see when you go on the EVAAS system. One is the value-added report. There's a learning module that EVAAS that you can link to, find it here. And you don't have to go through the whole learning module. You can just click on little 10-minute segments. They do a great job of explaining these reports. There's also a help button on that page that you can use. Feel free to explore and play. Really good resources, much better than I could possibly do. So they do a fantastic job. And then there's a diagnostic report tour. It's a little video where their characters go in and they explore this diagnostic report. This is the report that breaks students into 0 to 20th percentile, 20th to 40th percentile, and then determines how well the school did for different ability groups of the students. It can also be broken down into 3 ability groups. It's a super easy click. These reports have been revamped for this year. There's a lot of other additional resources out there. The first 4 are EVAAS, What's New document, that's talks about the new reports. Gap year resource, which is like the skip year. New features, and there's a great reporting webinar that you can watch. It's a little bit lengthier, but you can kind of zip and zag through that. So just a quick stop at roster verification, because that's always interesting this time of year. I just want to do a quick overview of what roster verification is. Basically, it's the combination of two things. One, you have to enter what percent of the school year was the child in the school. So there's a school metric, the education responsibility of that school within that year. You combine with that, say for like math, what percent of the math instruction that child received is the responsibility of each teacher that they had for math. They put those two things together, and that's how they come up with educator responsibility. Roster verification is coming up. I wanted to make sure everyone on this meeting knew that. But these are the two pieces. For every child, these are the percent that they were in the school for the year versus the percent that the teacher had responsibility, was connected and responsible for their education in a subject. So here are those phases. The important dates for this upcoming roster verification. Also, again, great resources already out there for you. Sonia Stevens did a January 2021 office hour on this process. It's the same process, same information, just different dates. You could watch that office hour similar to what we're doing today. Also, there's an EVAAS roster verification learning module. Again, there's a module for teachers. You can click on that and it walks through exactly what a teacher needs to do. There's a module for principal. You click on that and it tells you exactly what a principal needs to do, screenshots, the whole nine. It's a really good resource. And you will have access to this PowerPoint through the office hour site, and you'll be able to click on it right out of this program. Now, I know someone mentioned there was a question about kindergarten. EVAAS did not feel they could appropriate calculate kindergarten growth after last year due to every school district doing something a little bit different with iStation. So kindergarten was not calculated, but after this year, again, fresh start at the beginning of 2021, they are planning to calculate at the end of this year. And I don't know if they're using MOY to EOY or BOY to EOY. I'd have to look at that. If you want me to do that, please let me know. There's my email address. I'll be glad to look it up. I know it was a lot of information. I knew it would be in a short amount of time, but do you have any questions for me? You can unmute yourself or you can put it in the chat box. Okay, like Serena said, this will be recorded and available. I hope so, Sonia. I hope it is. There is a feedback opportunity. Please let us know what we can do better. Better next time. We do try to keep this in a manageable time frame, about 20-25 minutes. So please let us know how we did. We take your feedback very seriously to help continue to grow this series. And if you're interested, our next session will be in April from, it's always the third Tuesday of the month, and it's going to be on college enrollment trends for high schools. So if you are interested in that, please join us for that session. Again, it will be recorded as well. I hope something we said today triggered something and made you think. And I do appreciate your time. If you don't have any other questions, we will catch you next time. Let me know if you have any questions.
Hey, Julie, can I ask you a question?
Yes, please, Cheryl.
Okay. So as I've heard that there are principals sitting down with teams of teachers and grade levels going over the EVAAS data, and it just seems like I don't know what of